معرفة.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. So, in this session, we will be talking about the process of issuing a sukuk, right? And the different actions which needs to be taken in the whole process of issuing a sukuk. So, first, let us talk about structuring the sukuk. The first step in issuing sukuk involves structuring them, right? So, the structure needs to be worked out because, as we discussed, the sukuk structure is different than a bond structure. So, this structure must determine the type of sukuk they want to issue, number one. So, they want a tier 1, they want a tier 2, they want a senior unsecured, or they want covered, or they want a securitization sukuk. So, the first discussion which will start is what is the type of sukuk they want to issue. Then also in terms of offerings, whether it is a regular sukuk, they want listed, unlisted, that is also a discussion. Whether they want it in the form of a program or they want it a standalone, that is another discussion which happens. The second major discussion which happens is what is the asset? What kind of asset is available? There is a second discussion. So based on that comes the structure. So whether it's an ijara structure, it's a musharaka, it's a mudaraba, it's a wakala, that is another active discussion which happens with the in terms of the issuing process. Then the third is the issuer must choose the appropriate structure that complies with the Sharia. So the structure, it should not just comply with the regulator, legal counsel, regulator, but it should also comply with the Sharia. So that's another important piece which needs to be ticked off. The structure must meet the financing needs, right? For instance, if the issuer wants to finance a construction project, they can issue an ijara sukuk, right? So an ijara sukuk, the investors become the owners of the property and the investor receives the rent as a return. So that becomes an easier structure. So as I said, the first step in the process is structuring of the sukuk. In structuring, the evaluation is done on the quality of the asset, the type of the asset, then what is the possible legal framework which needs to be thought about, what is the Sharia structure, how the Sharia approval needs to be taken on the structure. So that is the first step. The second step here is appointing and finalization of the arranger, right? So as we had discussed earlier, there are a group of lead arrangers who are appointed, right? And who take the responsibility to complete the structuring and the other ancillary important responsibility. So the arranger will structure the sukuk and coordinate the transaction, right? The arranger is responsible for preparing the necessary documentation, and documentation includes the prospectus, offering circular, legal agreements, and the arranger can assist the issuer in marketing the sukuk to potential investor. So here let us just stop, and because you see there are 2-3 parts, right? The first is the structuring of the sukuk. And in this structuring, who helps? The lead arrangers would help. And then after structuring, what needs to be done? This needs to be marketed, because at the end of the day, somebody needs to buy this sukuk so that the liquidity comes into the structure. The important point is that you engage with the right arrangers, because the right arrangers will have the know-how, the experience, the relationship with the international investors who can bring those international investors to subscribe to the sukuk. So this is another important piece, which is marketing. And the more and the better and the experienced and the well-known institution you take as the marketeer, you will be benefited, because they will bring the wide audience in terms of investors to subscribe to the sukuk. So generally, what is the approach by most of the issuer is that they onboard some of the local well-established banks so that they can market to the local investors, and then they engage with some of the international banks so that the international banks could facilitate the issuer or the obligor to raise liquidity from the international market. So this is how the approach is done. The third point, which is important, is about appointing a trustee. So the issuer must appoint a trustee. The trustee represents the sukuk holder's interest, and the trustee ensures compliance with the Sharia law. The trustee monitors the underlying assets. The trustee ensures assets are managed in accordance with the Sharia principle, and the trustee takes action in case of default or breach of contract. Third piece is the trustee and the finalization and the appointment of the trustee, and this all facilitation is done through the legal firms who coordinates through the lead arrangers. Now, conducting the due diligence. This is again a very important aspect. So the issuer must conduct the due diligence before issuing the sukuk, right? So the due diligence is conducted on the underlying assets, the arranger and the trustee. This step involves reviewing the legal and the financial documentation. The issuer must verify compliance with the Sharia law. The issuer must disclose all the relevant information to the investors. Disclosure includes risks and potential returns. So at the end of the day, you need to make this as transparent as possible for the investors. A well done due diligence is very important in the process of issuing a sukuk. Now, the marketing of Sukuk. So, this is again very important. So, as I said, the role of the lead arrangers is the same. The institutions who have expertise on the local market are given responsibility to market the instrument at a local level. The ones who have the international experience and the know-how, they are given the mandate to mandate it at an international level. So once the documentation is prepared and the due diligence is completed, the arranger markets the Sukuk, right? So the issuer can target the local and the international investors. So here discuss about this. So generally what has been seen in the GCC market is that most of the local investors are interested in the Sukuks of tenure 5 years, right? So they are not interested to invest in long tenured Sukuk. So if it is a 10-year, 15-year, 30-year Sukuks, the local institutions and the local treasuries of Islamic banks do not have the appetite. I will not say appetite, but do not have the interest as such, maybe from the financial decisions they take, to invest in long-term Sukuks. So they are interested mostly in the 5-year tenure Sukuks. But the international investors, in a way, when we look at the split of the uptake of the Sukuks, we realize that most of the local investors go for the 5-year tenure, and the international investors are okay to go for 10 years, 15 years. So, and that's also a reason why many a times the issuers have different tenured Sukuk. So they issue 5-year and then also 10-year and 15 years, so that they can address the various requirements of the investors in terms of the tenure of the Sukuk. So this is also an important piece to understand, and in this process the lead arrangers advise and facilitates in terms of and give them the preferences of the investors on the tenures as well. Now, with regards to marketing, there are two parts to it, right? So one is a pre-announcement, and the pre-announcement basically involves finalizing all the transaction documents like the capital market documents and the Islamic documents, and then there is an announcement, right? There's a proper announcement done by the obligor about the Sukuk trade, right? So announcement basically is the commencement of marketing. Obligor confirms the informations are correct, then the announcement is done. Another piece which is very important is the listing of the Sukuk, right? So after the issuance, the Sukuk can be listed on a stock exchange or traded over the counter. Now listing provides the liquidity to the investors and helps the issuer raise more capital. The Sukuk can be listed on multiple exchanges depending on the issuer preferences. So what we have seen recently is that most of the issuers want to be listed in multiple listing exchanges, so that they give access to a wide variety of investors, not just in the GCC but at a global level as well. So basically they want to present the Sukuk at as many places as possible, so that the uptake is high. So the process is complex and involves various parties and legal requirements. This is with regards to listing. So Sukuk has become a popular financing tool due to its unique features and Shariah compliance. And so what we see today is that the Sukuks are available and listed by most of the issuers in well-established listing exchanges at a global level. Now then comes the book building. Now this is another important piece in the journey of the issuance or in the process of the Sukuk issuance. So book building concludes the marketing period. So lead arrangers gather investor feedback to gauge the market demand. They announce the transaction with an indicative issuance amount and pricing parameters. Investors submit the final orders, like helping the issuance size and pricing book building. So book building is used to ascertain the pricing and stimulate the investor interest. It involves creating an order book detailing investor demand. The processes determines the price range and final public offering price. Book building enables effective price discovery, transparency and market participation. It ensures securities are valued by market demand, benefiting both issuers and investors. Book building remains essential in capital markets, aiding corporate and security success. So book building is important because we have seen many a times Sukuks are oversubscribed. What it means is that there is more liquidity waiting to be invested in Sukuks, and there are less issuances which are coming to the market. And this is a simple supply and demand analogy. Most of the time when the Sukuks are going to the market, we see oversubscription, sometimes 3 times, 4 times, 6 times. So meaning to say there are more investors willing to invest, and many a times when there is more oversubscription, sometimes the issuance value is also increased. But based on the book building activity, ultimately the price is finalized. So that is how the process is done. Now the pricing phase sets the final issuance size and the pricing based on investor commitments. This requires legal entity identifier for both the obligor and the issuer SPV by pricing date, right? So this requires international securities identification number for each issuance. Under a multi-series program, one LEI is issued for the SPV, but each issuance gets a separate ISIN. Now this ensures transparency, regulatory compliance and market efficiency. Now here we need to understand what is the benchmark, right? So generally US Treasury yields are a common benchmark, though Sukuk pricing is based on underlying Sharia compliant asset. Swap rates are derived from the swap curve using benchmark swap spreads. The swap curve is used to calculate rates for any maturity/tenor. A spread is added to the swap rate to determine the final price. The swap curve is preferred due to the flexibility, reliability and absence of supply constraints. Mid swaps are the average mid swap rate plus margin, and margin is basically determined based on the credit risk. Okay, so that is how the final profit rate is concluded, meaning to say mid swap rate plus the margin, and the margin is with regards to is based on the credit risk of the obligor. And this is how the pricing is finalized, right, for the Sukuk, and this is how the pricing is done generally for Sukuk. For example, if the mid swap for 5 years is 4 and the margin is 150 basis points, so the final profit would be 5.5%. So this is just a simple analysis of what I'm trying to explain to you with regards to how the pricing is done for Sukuks. It need not be always this, but generally this is the way what we have seen in the market. Now let's come to the last and the main thing, right, the signing. The signing phase usually takes place 2 days after the pricing, so which allows the lead arrangers to finalize the investor arrangements and complete the administrative tasks. So funds are settled to the issuer, usually net of fees, within 5 days of deal completion, right? So generally this is what happens. And now let's come to the last stage, which is the closing. The closing phase occurs on T+3 or T+5 timeline after signing. Here there's a finalization of the documentation, the legal frameworks, there's a declaration of the trust, and the paying agency agreement are executed. The Sharia compliant documents, example if it's in sale agreement, ijara agreement, in case if it's an ijara or services agreements are signed. The underlying assets are transferred to the issuer SPVs. This is also important because this is a Sukuk, so the issuer needs to declare a trust over the assets. So the assets are transferred to the SPV. Generally it's a beneficial interest which is transferred to the SPV, and the SPV declares a trust on those assets. The registrar authenticates the global certificate delivered to common depository. Legal opinion from all parties are issued. The final fatwa confirms the Sharia compliance. The final prospectus, which is in the black with pricing and the size, is submitted to the stock exchange, and Sukuk certificates are formally listed for the secondary market trading. So this is in a nutshell the whole journey from the start till the end, how it happens, right? With regards to the issuance process of the Sukuk.
معرفة